old pickup truck rattled down the dusty road, kicking up a cloud of dirt that shimmered in the late afternoon sun. Farmer John wiped his brow with a worn handkerchief, his eyes scanning the fields that had been in his family for 3 generations. It was just another quiet evening in Willow Creek, or so he thought. But fate had other plans, because in less than 24 hours, a military convoy would blockade his farm, and the entire town would soon learn the truth about the stranger he'd helped that day. John didn't notice the man at first. The figure was slumped under the shade of the old oak tree at the edge of his property, his clothes frayed, his boots caked in mud. It was only when the man stirred, wincing as he adjusted his weight, that John realized he wasn't just passing through. There was something different about him, the way he held himself, the quiet discipline in his movements, even in exhaustion. This wasn't just another drifter. The farmer hesitated, then set down his bucket of feed and walked over. "You all right there, son?" The stranger's eyes flicked up sharp, guarded, but with a flicker of something deeper. "Shame, pain, just resting," the man muttered, his voice rough. John took in the faded army tattoo on his forearm, the way his hands trembled slightly. He'd seen that look before, back when his cousin returned from overseas. Without another word, John jerked his thumb toward the farmhouse. "Dinner on in an hour. You're welcome to join." The stranger stiffened. "I don't take handouts." John almost smiled. "Ain't a handout, it's what neighbors do." For a heartbeat, the man just stared. Then slowly he nodded. Neither of them knew it yet, but that simple exchange would change everything, because the next morning the soldiers would come. The farmhouse kitchen smelled of fresh bread and simmering stew, the kind of meal that stuck to your ribs and warmed you from the inside out. John set an extra plate at the worn wooden table, glancing at the stranger hovering near the doorway. The man, Mike, he'd gruffly introduced himself, had washed up at the pump outside, but he still carried the weight of the road in the hunch of his shoulders. He eyed the food like it was a test he wasn't sure he could pass. "Sit," John said, pushing a chair out with his boot. "Ain't nobody eats standing up in this house." Mike hesitated, then lowered himself stiffly into the seat, his hands curling into fists on his knees. The farmer pretended not to notice how he flinched when the screen door banged shut. War did things to a man. John knew that much. The first few minutes were quiet, just the scrape of forks and the crackle of the radio playing old country tunes. Then Mike's voice cut through the silence, rough as gravel. "You always this nice to drifters," John shrugged, swirling his coffee. "You always this suspicious of folks trying to feed you." A ghost of a smile touched Mike's mouth, there and gone. The dam broke slow, a story about a bad harvest one year, a joke about John's stubborn mule. But when Mike's sleeve rode up, revealing a jagged scar, the air changed. "Got that in Fallujah," he muttered, yanking the fabric down. John didn't press. Instead, he slid the apple pie across the table. "Medal's in my duffel somewhere," Mike added like an apology. "Not that it matters now." Night had fallen by the time they finished eating. Mike stood abruptly, chair screeching. "I should go." John didn't ask where to, just handed him a paper bag stuffed with leftovers and a woolen coat older than both of them combined. "Take it. Winter's coming." For a heartbeat, Mike looked like he might argue. Then he took the coat, shoulders sagging under its weight, or maybe under something else. The porch light caught the sheen in his eyes as he turned to leave. "Why'd you do all this?" John studied the calluses on his own hands. "Seems to me the world could use more thank yous and fewer why." Mike nodded once, sharp, like a soldier acknowledging orders. Then he vanished into the dark, the bag of food clutched tight against his chest. John watched until even the sound of his footsteps faded. He'd learned tomorrow that Mike had walked straight to the bus station, bought a one-way ticket to nowhere. He'd learned the military had been searching for him for months. But tonight, all he knew was the strange quiet of the house after company left, and the uneasy feeling that he'd just brushed up against a story far bigger than his cornfields. Somewhere down the road, truck engines rumbled to life. By dawn, they'd be at his gate. The rooster hadn't even crowed when John pulled on his boots, the kitchen floorboards creaking under his weight like they always did. He rubbed the sleep from his eyes and reached for the percolator, same routine as every morning for 30 years. But the second he stepped onto the porch, the coffee mug slipped from his fingers, shattering against the steps. A line of Humvees stretched down the dirt road, their headlights cutting through the morning mist like knives. Soldiers in full gear fanned out across his property, radios crackling with static. John's heart hammered against his ribs. Had Mike stolen something? Gotten into trouble? He barely registered the crunch of boots on gravel before a broad-shouldered officer stood before him, posture rigid as a fence post. "Mr. John Whittaker." The captain's voice carried the kind of authority that made men stand straighter without realizing it. John nodded, his mouth suddenly dry. The officer removed his hat, revealing a scar that ran from temple to jaw. "Captain Daniel Reynolds, 10th Mountain Division. We need to talk about the man you fed last night." John's stomach dropped. He'd heard stories about vets snapping, about bad turns and worse endings, but the captain's next words knocked the air clean out of him. "Sergeant Michael Dawson is a decorated war hero, saved 12 men in an ambush outside Mosul." He pulled a photo from his vest, a younger Mike in uniform, his smile not yet hardened by whatever came after. "He's been missing for 8 months. You're the first person he's let help him." A soldier approached with a duffel bag. John recognized the torn strap where Mike had clutched it too tight. "Found this at the Greyhound station," the soldier said. The captain's jaw worked. "He bought a ticket to Phoenix but never boarded. We think he's still in the area." John stared at the distant tree line where Mike had disappeared, the leftover pie still sitting untouched in his icebox. All this time, he'd thought he was just feeding a hungry man, not some lost war hero, not someone important enough for the U.S. Army to come knocking at dawn. The radio on Captain Reynolds' shoulder burst to life. "Sir, we've got footprints leading west toward the creek." The captain's eyes locked onto John's. "That your land?" John swallowed hard. "All the way to the old Miller place." Without a word, the captain turned and barked orders. Soldiers moved like shadows through the cornfields, their rifles slung low. John grabbed his jacket, suddenly cold despite the rising sun. He thought of Mike's trembling hands, the way he'd flinched at the slamming door. Not the reaction of a criminal, the reaction of a man who'd seen too much. The first Humvee's engine roared to life. Captain Reynolds paused at the passenger door. "You coming, Mr. Whitaker?" His tone softened. "He trusts you. That might be the difference between finding him and—" He didn't finish. He didn't need to. John's boots hit the gravel running. Somewhere out there in the golden dawn, a broken soldier was hiding. And the old farmer suddenly understood. This wasn't just about one meal anymore. This was about whatever came after. The convoy rolled through the backroads at walking speed, soldiers scanning every ditch and thicket. John sat stiffly in the lead Humvee, the photo of Mike in uniform burning a hole in his hands. The smiling young man in the picture bore little resemblance to the hollow-eyed stranger who'd sat at his table. Captain Reynolds broke the silence. "That ambush I mentioned. His unit was pinned down for 6 hours. Dawson carried 2 wounded men through enemy fire, then went back for more." The Humvee hit a pothole, jostling the framed metal in Reynolds' lap, a silver star. "Command put him up for this. He never showed to receive it." John stared out at the passing fields, remembering how Mike had winced when reaching for the pie. Not from injury, from the way John's grandson had slammed the screen door. The pieces clicked together with terrible clarity. "He ain't running from you all," John said slowly. "He's running from what's in his head." The captain didn't deny it, just adjusted the radio headset, pressing into his scar. VA lost track of him after his 3rd missed appointment. His sister's been putting up missing posters in 3 states. The radio crackled. "Contact West Perimeter, single male matching description." Tires spun gravel as the convoy lurched forward. Through the windshield, John saw a figure stumble from the creek bed. Mike, shirt soaked to the chest, wild-eyed like a cornered animal. Soldiers fanned out in practice formation, but John was out of the vehicle before anyone could stop him. "Mike," the name tore from John's throat raw as a crow's cry. The veteran froze, shoulders heaving. Up close, John saw the feverish gleam in his eyes, the way his fingers twitched near invisible triggers. This wasn't the quiet man from last night. This was someone caught between then and now, between the farm and some faraway desert. The soldiers edged closer. Mike backed toward the rushing creek, his voice breaking. "Just leave me be." John raised empty hands, stepping carefully over the uneven ground. "It's all right, son. These boys just want to talk." A bitter laugh escaped Mike. "They always just want to talk." Right before his words dissolved into a shudder as his gaze locked onto Captain Reynolds. Recognition flashed. "Danny." The captain stepped forward, hands trembling slightly despite his parade ground posture. "Yeah, Sarge, it's me." The radio on his belt squawked with tense voices, but Reynolds silenced it with a practiced flick. "We've been looking for you since you walked out of that VA hospital." Mike's knees buckled. He caught himself on a birch sapling. "You don't understand. After Mosul, after what I—" Reynolds cut him off with a sharp gesture. "You saved 12 men that day." He unsnapped the metal case with military precision. Sunlight glinted off the silver star. "This belongs to you." Mike stared at it like it might bite him. "I don't deserve." His voice cracked. "Jenkins and Torres are still in wheelchairs because of my call." John watched understanding dawn on Reynolds' face. The captain crouched to Mike's level, his dress uniform soaking up creek mud. "Listen to me, Sarge. Torres named his kid after you. Jenkins sends you letters every damn month that get returned unopened." He thrust the medal forward. "This isn't about what you lost. It's about who came home because of you." A dam broke behind Mike's eyes. He sagged against the tree, his breathing ragged. John moved closer, smelling the sour sweat of panic, the iron tang of old blood on Mike's shirt. He must have reopened wounds scrambling through the brush. Without thinking, John shrugged off his flannel and draped it over Mike's shaking shoulders, same as he'd done for his own boy after nightmares. The soldiers stood frozen, rifles slack. Reynolds exhaled sharply through his nose. "Medics now!" As boots pounded toward them, Mike clutched the fabric at his chest, his voice barely audible. I tried to be normal after the hospital, the sounds, the smells." His fingers found the fresh scar on Reynolds' face. "You got this saving Ramirez, didn't you?" The captain nodded once. Mike's hand fell away. "I should have been there." John watched two medics approach with a stretcher, their movements deliberate as bomb techs. This wasn't just about medals or military protocol. This was about a man who'd left part of himself in some distant desert, who'd been walking America's backroads trying to outpace his own mind. As they loaded Mike into the Humvee, John caught the captain's arm. "Were you taking him?" Reynolds studied the horizon where storm clouds gathered. "Walter Reed first, then home." He handed John a dog-eared photo from his vest, a younger Mike grinning beside a dark-haired woman and a gap-toothed girl. "His sister's flying in from Ohio. She's got a room ready." The captain hesitated, then added quietly, "You should come. He asked for you." The first raindrops hit the dust as the convoy prepared to leave. John stood in the road long after the taillights disappeared, the weight of Mike's unfinished pie still heavy in his stomach. Somewhere beyond the storm, a broken soldier was finally going home. And the old farmer suddenly understood. Last night's kindness hadn't been the end of the story, just the first fragile stitch in a wound that might never fully heal. The fluorescent lights of Walter Reed's visiting room hummed like angry bees, casting harsh shadows on the linoleum floor. John shifted uncomfortably in the plastic chair, his Sunday-best shirt stiff against his sunburnt neck. He'd driven 6 hours through the storm to get here, the photo of Mike's family burning a hole in his breast pocket. When the door finally creaked open, the man who entered bore little resemblance to the desperate soul from the creek. Clean-shaven, in fresh fatigues, Mike stood straighter, but his eyes still held that fractured look John recognized from wounded livestock. They stared at each other across the sterile room. Mike spoke first, voice rough. "You didn't have to come." John shrugged, the motion loosening his stiff collar. "Ain't about having to." He reached into his battered satchel and pulled out a mason jar clouded with condensation. "Brought you something." Mike's fingers trembled slightly as he accepted it. Willow Creek's famous apple cider, the kind John's wife used to make. The kind that tasted like home. A woman's sob cracked the silence. In the doorway stood the dark-haired sister from the photo, her hands pressed to her mouth. "Michael." The name came out half prayer, half accusation. Mike froze, the jar clutched to his chest like armor. She crossed the room in 3 strides and slapped him hard across the face, then pulled him into a hug so tight John heard the man's ribs creak. 8 months, she wept into his shoulder. "We thought you were dead in a ditch somewhere." Mike's face crumpled. He buried his nose in her hair, breathing hard. "I'm sorry, Lena. God, I'm so." His words dissolved as a small figure darted between them, the gap-toothed girl from the photo, now taller, her braids streaked with purple. She stared up at her uncle with solemn eyes. "You missed my birthday, twice." Mike sank to his knees, the cider jar rolling forgotten across the floor. "I know, Munchkin, The girl studied his shaking hands, then solemnly placed her stuffed rabbit in them. "You can borrow Mr. Hops until you feel better." John turned to leave, suddenly feeling like an intruder, but Mike's voice stopped him. "Wait." The veteran stood, keeping one hand on his niece's shoulder. "This is John, the man who," he swallowed hard, "who reminded me what it's like to sit at a family table." Lena's eyes flooded fresh tears. She grabbed John's calloused hands. "Thank you," she whispered, her grip surprisingly strong for such delicate fingers. "The VA said his malnutrition was—" She couldn't finish. A nurse arrived with discharge papers, her smile professional. "Sergeant Dawson's room at the transitional house is ready." Mike flinched almost imperceptibly at the word room. John saw it, saw the panic flicker behind his eyes at the thought of 4 walls. Without thinking, the farmer cleared his throat. "Got a spare cot in my barn. Needs some patching, but the stars come through the roof real nice." The room held its breath. Lena squeezed her brother's arm. Mike stared at John, his Adam's apple bobbing. "I can't ask you to." "Ain't asking," John interrupted. "Just saying." He nudged the cider jar with his boot. "Besides, someone's gotta teach you to make this proper. My Martha's recipe deserves better hands than yours." Captain Reynolds chose that moment to enter, crisp uniform clashing with the emotional wreckage. He took in the scene with a soldier's eye, the tear-streaked faces, the abandoned stuffed animal, John's stubborn, set jaw. "Well, Dawson," he said mildly, "looks like you've got your marching orders." He handed Mike a folder thick with paperwork. "Medical discharge processed, full benefits, and—" he produced a small box. "This belongs to you." The silver star caught the fluorescent light as Mike lifted it from its velvet cradle. His thumb traced the engraving, his name, the date of the ambush. The date Jenkins and Torres almost died. His breathing hitched. Lena pressed against his side. "They're alive because of you, idiot," she murmured, echoing the captain's words from the creek. Mike closed the box with a snap. When he looked at John, something had settled in his gaze. "That cot's still available." The farmer grinned, fishing truck keys from his overalls. "Long as you don't mind for milking." As they walked out together, past the saluting orderlies, through the automatic doors into the sunlight, John felt the weight of Mike's hand on his shoulder. Not quite steady, not quite whole, but trying. Behind them, Lena whispered to her daughter, "Uncle Mike's going to be okay." The girl considered this, then shouted after them, "Can I visit? Mr. Hops gets lonely." Mike's laughter rang out across the parking lot, rusty but real. The sound followed them all the way to John's pickup, where a single piece of straw from the barn floor still clung to the passenger seat. Waiting. The first veteran showed up at dawn 3 days later, a gaunt man with hollow cheeks and navy tattoos standing awkwardly at the edge of John's cornfield. Mike was repairing the chicken coop when he spotted him. Without a word, he set down his hammer and walked to the farmhouse, returning with 2 steaming mugs of coffee. The stranger accepted one with shaking hands. "Heard there was a place," he began, then trailed off. Mike simply nodded toward the rising sun. "Barns warm this time of morning." By week's end, 5 more arrived. Some came in threadbare uniforms, others in civilian clothes that hung loose on their frames. John watched from the kitchen window as Mike showed them how to mend fences, the movement slow and deliberate. No sudden noises, no touching without warning. The old farmer began setting extra plates at supper without being asked. News traveled fast in Willow Creek. On Sunday, the church ladies arrived with casserole dishes piled high. Pastor Williams brought his toolbox and started fixing the sagging porch swing. Then the school bus came rattling down the lane, 24 third graders clutching handmade cards that read "Thank you, veterans," in crayon. Mike stood frozen as a freckled girl tugged his sleeve. "My grandpa was in the army too. He cries sometimes." She pressed a lopsided clay medal into his palm. "This is for being brave." The VA caught wind by month's end. A stern-faced administrator arrived, clipboards in hand, ready to shut down whatever unlicensed halfway house operation was happening. She left 3 hours later with dirt under her manicured nails, having helped plant an entire row of tomatoes. "We'll send a caseworker weekly," she muttered, stuffing a jar of John's apple butter into her briefcase. Lena visited every weekend, her daughter's purple braids bouncing as she raced to the barn. The girl had appointed herself official chicken feeder, her stuffed rabbit now permanently residing in Mike's cot. One evening, John found her teaching 3 veterans how to make friendship bracelets at the picnic table, their large fingers fumbling with the tiny strings. "Uncle Mike says if I can learn fractions, you can learn this," she announced sternly. The real change came on a rainy Tuesday. John was fixing the tractor when tires splashed through the mud. Captain Reynolds stepped out, not in uniform but jeans and a faded ranger's hoodie. Behind him, a broad-shouldered man maneuvered a wheelchair down the ramp of a specially equipped van. "Dawson," the captain called, "brought someone to see you." Mike dropped the feed bucket. "Jenkins," the wheelchair-bound veteran grinned, "heard you turned this place into some kind of paradise." His smile faltered slightly as he glanced at his legs. "Figured I'd check if the rumors were true." Mike knelt in the mud, eye level with his old comrade. "It's just a farm," he said hoarsely. Jenkins gripped his shoulder. "Bullshit. Lena says you've saved 8 guys this month." That night the farmhouse overflowed with laughter and stories. John watched from his rocking chair as Mike passed around cider, his movements steadier than they'd been in months. The kitchen wall now held a growing collection: clay medals from schoolchildren, VA commendation letters, a framed photo of Mike receiving his silver star at last. But the most important addition hung unnoticed by the door, a simple wooden sign carved by one of the veterans. It read, in uneven letters, "Whitaker and Dawson Farm. All who hunger welcome." As fireflies dotted the twilight, John realized the strangest thing. He couldn't remember the last time he'd eaten supper alone. Somewhere between that first meal with Mike and tonight's crowded table, his quiet farm had become something else. Not a refuge, not a clinic, just a place where broken men remembered how to be whole, one sunrise and starry night at a time. The screen door squeaked open. Mike settled into the adjacent rocker, two fresh mugs in hand. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the newest arrival, a young Marine barely out of his teens, tentatively accept a slice of pie from Lena's daughter. The kid's shoulders shook as the girl solemnly informed him, "You have to stay forever now. That's the rules." Mike sipped his cider. "Think we need to build another barn?" John chuckled, stretching his aching back. "Think you're right." Above them, the Milky Way stretched clear and bright, the same stars that had watched over soldiers and farmers since time began. Still here, still shining, still reminding lost souls the way home. The first frost glittered on the pumpkin vines as John adjusted the camera tripod near the barn. Behind him, Mike helped a new arrival, a Vietnam vet with snow-white hair, navigate the porch steps. The old man's laughter rang out as Lena's daughter presented him with a lopsided veteran survival kit containing homemade cookies, hand warmers, and a carefully drawn map to the best fishing spot on the creek. John pressed record. "Most of y'all know how this story started," he said, his breath making little clouds in the crisp air. "With a meal, a moment of kindness, and a military convoy at dawn." The camera panned to show Mike teaching a double amputee how to whittle, to Jenkins tending the wheelchair-accessible raised garden beds, to the picnic table where 3 generations of veterans now gathered daily. Turns out, what we needed wasn't just to help one lost soldier, but to remember we all need a place to heal. He walked toward the camera, the farmhouse glowing golden in the background. If this story moved you, hit that like button. Subscribe for more tales of hope from unexpected places. A grin crinkled his weathered face. And remember, your next act of kindness might just change someone's whole world. The screen faded to black as children's laughter echoed off-screen. Then white text appeared. Whitaker and Dawson Farm now houses 11 veterans. Want to help? Links in description. For a heartbeat, there was only silence. Then the unmistakable sound of a spoon clinking against a mason jar, Mike off camera, stealing the last of the apple butter. The credits rolled to the sound of John's mock outrage and the little girl's triumphant declaration. "I told you he'd do it again." Fade out, story told, but just beginning.